And we're back. You're listening to the Exitology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show on the number one business talk and news network on the internet, IBGR, International Business Growth Radio. I am your host, Jason Wally Waldron, and I'm joined here today by Chris Felton. And Chris has been sharing some amazing stories. First, he told his story of how he was on the brink of bankruptcy and divorce and how he turned it around. And then we talked about some of these long-held money beliefs, and really a key of that was how do we measure our success but also be aligned with it? In other words, how do we stay objective about things but also, hold ourselves accountable? And so I wanted to take this next section, Chris, with you and dive even deeper. This is a lot of times we're talking about external business philosophy things, but this is a very inner game and type of discussion we've been having here today. And so you shared something with me recently about how, essentially you said, your thinking creates your world. And then you actually took it another level deeper and you said, taking responsibility for yourself is, and, take us away with those kind of ideas in mind.
Yeah. I mean, it's that whole objective reality conversation, man. I mean, that's, and I got that from my friend Steve Siebold, who's interviewed, he's got the longest running study of self-made millionaires and billionaires, over 1,300 he's interviewed for the last 35 years.
Wow.
And the number one characteristic of those people is objective reality. It is that staying out of delusion, right? And it's so easy to get deluded as a human. So go ahead.
So can I push back on that a little bit, because and this is a very friendly pushback from a place of curiosity, but a lot of the folks who are listening to this are going to say, look, I'm an engineer or I run a firm that deals with objective reality all day long, right? Because you got to think we're dealing with manufacturers, we're dealing with industrial service, we're dealing with blue collar. Like each of these people are keeping the built environment together, right? So they might be listening to this, and I would even guess they probably are, and saying, dude, I already know all about objective reality. Like, why are you hammering home this whole thing? How dare you even say that I have an issue with objective reality? So like, what would you say to that?
Well, I mean, if you like your results, you can tune me out. That's
beautiful.
That's fine, right? That's
right.
fine. And I'm not, and maybe I'm not necessarily speaking to that guy, but, just having been a student of Steve's work, and he was my book coach. And he talks about it all the time. It's just, and maybe it's not even in your business, but you have delusion in your relationships.
Gotcha.
You have delusion, you have delusion, your delusion around your health, right? I'm as healthy as I've ever been, but a year ago I was like, my gut's hanging out, and I'm like, I'm working on it, right? Like, right. And I kind of had a little bit of a health scare that kind of woke my ass up, but I was delusional about my health. So it might not even be the business, and
okay.
But there's probably something in your life, your spiritual life, and it's not about beating yourself up or hammering yourself. That's not objective reality. Most people beat themselves up. That's because they don't want to feel bad. Objective reality is going, you know what? Maybe your business is rocking. Maybe your manufacturing facility is rocking. Maybe it's great. And it's not about being perfect, but
right.
Are there some other areas of your life that you are delusional about? Right. Because I was delusional about my first marriage. I'm like, oh, we're great. Right. No, we weren't.
Right. Well, yeah. And I poked the bear there a little bit, to kind of make the point, right? Because, and I like where you went with that, because, we when we walk into businesses, we see a lot of things like, oh, and the way that on the business side, here's where the delusion presents itself a lot of times. It's called, I think that I have a private golf course valuation of my business, but really I have a public golf course, or maybe even like the dirt road on the way to the public golf course valuation, right? And so, right, like I thought I had this amazing business that was worth something. We come in, we do an analysis on it. We find out, you know what, you get a lot of problems here. Other ways it presents itself, for instance, might be A lot of these businesses, they look like a real business, but really they have 4 giant clients. And if any one of those clients left, they'd be in a giant troublesome spot very, very quickly. Saw a lot of that up and down here. We're both, you and I are both in the Denver metro area. And so we saw a lot of that, especially in the advanced manufacturing space when COVID hit, right? Because when Boeing shuts down the 737 MAX and then COVID hits 9 months later, and all of a sudden your 2 biggest clients, were called Boeing and Raytheon or something like that, you might not have gotten bailed out while they did. And so there's a lot of that goes on in terms of the delusion. So I appreciate you pointing that out, because other ways that I've seen that is exactly what you've talked about, right? Where, here's someone who is supposedly so successful, but they let their health slip, right? So are you really successful if you don't have health? Probably not, because you're going to die. I mean, so I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. And so you started with being objective, and you backed it up with studies from Steve Siebold. But then how do you map that into actually creating your world going forward, right? Because if entrepreneurs are the ones who are creating a world that does not yet exist by creating reality and, with new solution sets and innovation, all this type of stuff, how do you map these two things?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I was delusional about my money because of the beliefs, and so I had to have some objective reality around that. And then it was about getting with my spouse and setting what I call a unifying goal.
Okay. Yep.
Right. And the reason I'm bringing some of this personal stuff in is a lot of the coaches I interviewed, they just want to talk about business. But my coach that worked with me for 4.5 years, he's like, yeah, you got your personal life, your business life, but dude, they're all the same. If your stuff sucks at home, like it's going to bleed into your business life.
Totally.
Right. And so, there's times we'd want to talk, strategery, and we'll kind of wrap up with one of the biggest segments that changed my life. And because I always thought it was a strategy thing.
Sure.
And there's so much awry in my personal life, but as it relates to your question, I mean, Marla and I sat down and, dude, I was $250,000 in debt.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you want? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, I want 100,000 in the bank.
Okay.
And I was like, holy crap. Like, we got nothing. But we spent a lot of time around why that mattered.
Yeah.
So we did the deep, right? Because whatever it is you want, people that struggle think that's a logical step.
Mm-hmm.
But everything you want in life, you're hoping to get a feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we put a feeling of relief, financial relief, freedom around the goal. And we put, if you have a Lamborghini sitting in your garage with no gas in it, it's not going to do any good.
Right.
So the gas was really our compelling emotional reasons about why we wanted to get to. And then I had to be like, okay, what must I be thinking about? Right. Because I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but I'm just kind of telling you what we did. We quit looking at our stuff and our problems and our debt. Right. Instead of fixing stuff, we started creating wealth.
Right.
And that's the stuff that caused us to pivot and change.
Yeah. And I think for the listeners, absolutely that answers the question, right? Because first, you went back and, you knew what you didn't want, which was to stay $250,000 in useless debt. That's the no-brainer. But then very quickly, well, what do you want, right? And Marla says $100,000 in the bank. And here's the important part of all of that, though, is why, right? It sounds like you went multiple deeps on the why question. And ultimately, I love where you landed, which was, it helps me feel free. It gives me options, right? You didn't say this, but I'll bet it helped you stay safe. Is that fair enough? Right?
Sure.
Because I know from my work with entrepreneurs in our various capacity, we ultimately get to know them, almost as close as family. And I know you have the same experience with the folks you work with. And, it's very interesting to finally understand where that psychology is. And I think where I'm going with this is I'm inviting our listeners to really take it to heart, to understand that idea of, if things on the homestead aren't good, things in the business might not be good, or vice versa. If things aren't going well in the business, then it's probably not going to be great in the homestead. And you really want it to go in both directions. And so really take it upon yourself to do some of that work and understand, what safety looks like for you, what does security look like for you, but then what is belongingness, what is aspiration, and kind of play with those numbers to understand what those feelings are. And I think that's really the point of taking responsibility, right? Is we're merging the right and left hemispheres of the brain.
Yeah. I mean, it's just what my coach, and I think I said in the first segment, he said, you have no relationship to results.
Right.
And you don't even know really what you want.
Right.
Like you lack clarity. And
right.
that's one of the most beat up topics anywhere is what do you want? What's your why? What's all that?
Right.
And most people like hear that, Wally, and they're like, oh yeah, I got to get clear. And they make a note and then they, they walk out and then they find a squirrel and they're like, I'm going to go first. I'm going to chase that squirrel. Then I'm going to get really clear on what I want.
Well, you're kind of pointing in this direction, although you haven't explicitly said it. And this is something that I really want our listeners to understand is, one of the reasons why these issues happen where you end up with an all hat, no cattle situation, or, things look great on the outside, but they're a disaster on the inside, is because, and particularly I'm speaking to the men here, men are very good at sort of ignoring those very important gut feelings that are giving you lots and lots of data and feedback. And I think it's important to kind of open up that concept for folks. And, there's a reason why you might want to go sit in the tree stand and, even if you're not actually going hunting, like go sit in the forest for 2 days and see what really comes up. And so that's that, but my point being there's actual data and feedback that comes in through the emotional channel, not just the numerical channel. And it's part of that objective reality that you were speaking to. So Chris, why don't you tell folks where they can find more about you real quick here, and then we'll take a short 2-minute break and we're going to get into this last section here after our quick break.
Yep. ChrisFelton.me and also on LinkedIn as well. Post there frequently.
Awesome. You are listening to the Exitology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show on the International Business Growth Radio Network.